Hello everyone, welcome back to newearth.land in this mini-series that we're calling Agenda 2030 Exposed. So far we've talked about no poverty, that was the first goal. Then we talked about zero hunger, and then we talked about health and nutrition. And if that wasn't as absurd and hilarious enough for you already, we're now going to talk about education and their supposed goal of improving education. But of course, the first word that you'll hear when you read this goal is that they're going to make it more accessible to people. So they're not really talking about the quality of the education, they're just talking about spreading this degree of education. So what really is education? Well, it simply should be about allowing the individual to unfold, sort of like a flower, right? Starting off as these tiny little seeds, and then these seedlings, and then we sort of blossom into these vast, expansive minds. That's what should happen. But instead, what happens is actually the complete opposite of that. And so Western education, ultimately, that we also call elementary education, actually fractures the mind into these tiny little elements and renders it incapable of comprehending the whole, which, as Descartes said, even though he was a grave materialist, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which is very much the case. So, the word balance isn't involved here. It's just simply, how do we spread this level of education? No one should go uneducated, right? When actually the sort of uneducated in a Western sense is an incredible gift to some degree. But again, it is about balance. But just being in nature, being surrounded by this natural way of life, will absolutely expand the imagination, the right brain faculties, the intuition, okay? The divergent thinking that we've discarded and thrown away, as I mentioned, mostly throughout sort of the 18th century and the times of the Enlightenment, where we became excessively scientific in our approach. And that's not strictly a bad thing. It's just that if we don't get the balance right, we can be totally sort of formulated and compressed. The mind has become too attentive. There's too much attention being paid. As Alan Watts said, attention is narrowed perception. And so we were sort of walking around incarcerated mostly by these boxes that we're sort of spending our lives in. So our attention is very much focused on the teacher. And this is what we call convergent thinking, where the information, the data sources are all coming from this external source into our minds. Remember this, remember that, remember this, because you've got the exam at the end of the month. And if you do well, you get to go to Yale, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, right? And so it's very much this egoic quest of dominance over others. And so the better you are remembering and parroting things, the more you are supposedly educated and the more intelligent you are. But of course, there are many different types of intelligence, and this is principally just the intellect and memory that we're dealing with here. And all, of course, the quiz games, that they're essentially leading us down this path where society is almost seemingly revolving around these quiz shows. And another quote from Alan Watts is that society is a hoax, and Terence McKenna, culture is not your friend. So we're just being used like these automaton robots with a memory. And again, this is what they mean when they say that we've got to make education accessible to all. They want you to be brainwashed. Ultimately, is what's happening here. Okay, it's not about true education, and this is what the sort of Steiner and the Montessori schools were more about. It's like, hey, let's just leave this individual alone and see what they like doing, and then let's just have a more hands-off approach, see what they gravitate towards, as opposed to being thrown into these sort of almost like Pavlovian system in these elementary schools, where you're going in this room and then the bell rings, and then you're going into this room. Now you're learning something completely different. Now you're going, this is a way to confuse someone. And there is an old Jesuit statement that goes something along the lines of, show me a child till the age of 7 and I'll show you the man. Meaning that your mind begins as this sort of malleable, infinite array of possibilities. But then once the state is done with you, all those possibilities are shunned down. And this is why I'm having such a hard time getting this simple message of freedom across into the world, because people don't think it can be possible. And people aren't interested. I've done events and groups, and you can see that people, once it's all is said and done, no one's really interested, because they see it as, oh, that's that guy's project and he's just trying to sell us something, and that's all there is to it. But we need to absolutely come together and unite the left and right brain hemispheres, just as is shown in a painting called Creation of Adam by Michelangelo. You see that's a right brain. This is God reaching down to Adam and just saying, hey, look, there's all these other ways of thinking. There's the imagination itself, As William Blake said, to the eyes of imagination, nature is imagination itself. We'll never see the light of day. We'll never see this mental illumination and enlightenment take place on a mass scale until we have the freedom to actually experience what these right brain faculties have to offer. Because it's quite weird to people. It's quite strange, when you sort of talk about some of these notions, like the Hermetic principles, the principle of mentalism, panpsychism, correspondence, polarity, vibration. The true nature of reality is concealed by our enforced gaze upon external things in the material world, and principally other people trying to tell us things. And you're right, you're wrong. It's not so much about the answer, it's about the question. It's about the questioning mind that can cultivate this heightened state of consciousness. And that's what should be the goal in the New World Order. Of course, it's not going to be, but the goal for Agenda 2030 should be about, okay, how do we reform education, not how do we just make it accessible to everyone. It's like, well, let's just first ask ourselves some basic questions. What is education in of itself? How do we improve the mind, not just increase the amount to which people can be invited into these schools and have free education? Of course they want it to be free because they want you to be brainwashed as quickly as possible. And I'd agree on a surface level, of course it should be free, but you've got to fundamentally reform education first and foremost before we can even consider offering it to children and beyond. And each different rung, it gets more and more precise. The mind is more and more incarcerated the more it gets involved in these different fields, and you end up being a master of a very small discipline, a very tiny little area of expertise within another area of expertise. And this is what the PhD is. So that they're leading the mind away from the whole and funneling it down. And of course, some people are immune to this, and people have gone far into the education system and they've maintained that balance. It's not just a black and white thing, but that is really the sort of psyop behind education, is to make you to think of yourself as this tiny little unit around which there is ultimately infinite nothingness and just a mass void. And that's what the lack of spiritual attainment does in society. So that ultimately is what is taking place here. We're not capable of comprehending the whole, because we're too forced, our attention is too forced upon external gaze, sport, education, shopping, politicians, and it's a sorry state of affairs. The solution is so simple, and this is why we're still focused on these politicians and these supposed saviors and the villains. They're just providing the villains and the heroes. So it's a constant manipulation to allow us to continue at this very base level of human consciousness. So in a nutshell, we need to expand the mind. We need to, therefore, first and foremost, create true freedom in the world to allow and afford ourselves the time to start utilizing the imagination and to daydream and to not see these things as negative, whimsical things. Like spirituality itself is still sort of on a mass media scale. It's still considered to be some sort of fringe, strange, bizarre thing. But anyway, newearth.land, if you'd like to learn more about how we can create the true freedom that can actually expand people's minds and create a true education system on the planet. That isn't to say, let's discard everything that the Western system is offering. Of course not. But let's now bring in more right brain faculties, such as the intuition, the thinking, being taught to actually think and not just what to think, for example, thinking in patterns, and as opposed to just thinking in these linear sort of like numerical styles. And of course maths and language are some of the first things and predominant lessons that dictate Western education. It's sort of like the 7 liberal arts, right? That's what needs to be considered again. So you've got the Trinity first and foremost, haven't we? Where we've got logic, rhetoric, and we've got grammar. And then beyond that, we have numbers. We have numbers in time, so it's mathematics. And then we've got music. And then we've got numbers in space. And then we've got numbers in space and time. So this is essentially the different 7 liberal arts, that being sort of mathematics, architecture, music, and then astronomy being numbers in space and time, if I've remembered that correctly. So anyway, yeah, that's my little video on this rather strange and outright deceptive goal of the New World Order. Do stick around newearth.land if you'd like to learn more about how we can truly liberate ourselves and create no more rent and no more bills in society. There's no need for those things to exist. So let's just come together and create a better world for everyone. Thanks very much for watching.